Let's talk about depression as a health concern. So depression is a common and serious mental illness that if the symptoms last for more than 2 weeks is a diagnosis. So what is chronic depression? It's feelings of sadness or having a depressed mood. Person might feel guilt inside, or they feel worthless. They may have a loss of interest or enjoyment in activities that they usually enjoy. They may have appetite changes. Either they gain weight or they lose weight because of those changes. And then sleep dysfunction. They may sleep too much or not sleep enough. And either one of those options, it causes a loss of energy and increased fatigue. And then cognitive impairments. Difficulty concentrating, making decisions, thinking clearly. These can be issues. And then if depression goes untreated, thoughts of death and then suicidal ideation can be a concern. So depression can affect people for different reasons, of course. Receiving a terminal medical diagnosis can be devastating, as can losing a job or experiencing financial devastation. And then loss of a loved one. There is that time period that is the healthy grieving period, but anything beyond that is considered depression. And then genetics. A person can be predisposed to depression. Another factor would be an abusive relationship. A person can suffer depression because of the abusive relationship. And then retirement can be an issue. Those who retire from lifelong careers can oftentimes find the busyness of life to be a blessing and discover when they retire their lives feel empty. And then women struggle with this depression statistically more than men do. As far as statistics, in Davis County, the rate of depression is 23%. In Utah, the rate of depression as compared to other states is 22.5%, which is lower than Davis County, of course. And then nationally, 1 in 10 adults will experience depression. That's about 19.3%, or 18 million adults. And then internationally, it's 300 million people that will experience depression, with no respect to age or gender or economic status, culture, religion, race. None of those things are factors in that. It's just a global number. And then women are more likely to experience depression by 29%, or 29% of women, I should say, experience depression, and men, 16.1% of men experience depression. Among the factors that play a role in the difference in the higher rate of depression, socioeconomic status and access to job opportunities and education and social support play a defined role. It's astounding to find that the rates significantly decrease with higher income brackets. It makes sense. If you have enough money to pay for your bills and the essentials of life, you are more peaceful. And in contrast, it is a blow to mental health if you have to depend on others for your financial support or any kind, and can significantly add to depression or cause it in the first place. Access to job opportunities may or may not be related to one's level of education. However, generally speaking, a higher education, higher than a high school diploma, will yield higher success rates in job opportunities, and in turn, higher income levels, and finally, higher affluency. Social support has a huge impact on a person's life, of course. Friends and family connections, work associates and neighbors, they all play a role in the mental health of an individual. And in contrast, isolation can be detrimental to an individual's well-being if they feel alone, abandoned, hopeless, helpless. Sometimes an individual can be more susceptible to depression because of the different chemical combinations that exist in their brain that contribute to depression. Genetics can also play a huge role in depression. A person who has a family history of depression, they're more predisposed to having it themselves. So, for example, a set of twins. If one twin has depression, then the other twin has about a 70% higher rate of or risk of having depression themselves. And then coincidentally, as far as personality is concerned, people who have low self-esteem, who don't adapt well to change, who are pessimistic and feel easily overwhelmed, these people are more susceptible to suffering from depression also. And then environmental risks. Those who are continuously exposed to violence, neglect, or abuse, or poverty are more likely to suffer depression also. Okay, one of the many root causes is based on the type of population. So I chose 3 populations here. Females have twice the risk of suffering depression than do men for several reasons. Some of those reasons are treatment in society, job opportunities offered or not offered continue to be an issue, and then of course income level that continues to be an issue. And the World Health Organization issued this statement that gender determines the differential power and control men and women have over their socioeconomic determinants of their mental health and lives, their social position, status and treatment in society, and their susceptibility and exposure to specific mental health risks. It's projected that in 2020, that depression will be the second leading cause of disability burden, and it's twice as common for women. And then teenagers, they suffer from depression because of many factors, but it seems to me that the leading 2 factors are academic expectations and whether they're put on them by themselves or their parents or the school or whatever, and then peer pressure can play a huge part in their depression. And then the elderly often suffer from depression because of a status change in life. Most often the idea, again, of retiring sounds exciting, but it really comes down to it. The busyness of life is what keeps them mentally active and challenged, and they miss that. And then declining health causes discouragement and depression, as well as does grief of losing loved ones, friends, spouse. They're in the age where people start passing away and dying. And then they feel feelings of loneliness because of all of these things, and sadness. And these feelings are manifest in low levels of energy and headaches. So it's a little bit different. Okay, now, while people with depression can oftentimes have a lot of these needs met in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so many of these needs are not met. And that seems to, for me, is more of a focus on this slide. So we start with physiological. Their needs of food and water and sleep are all affected. So people who suffer depression, they sleep a lot and they eat and drink very little. Therefore, their physical health becomes at risk. Next, their safety needs can be affected in that their employment can suffer because maybe they're sleeping too much or they don't feel well, they call in sick, which can cause an issue with property. Say they get their car repossessed or get kicked out of their apartment or whatever. There's their personal security that's affected by those things. Their resources deplete. And then because of now those 2 bottom tiers being affected, we have the depression that affects the friendship and family and sense of connection with those around them, because again, they're sleeping, not feeling well, calling in sick, starting to not feel good about themselves, starting to isolate themselves. And then we move up to the 4th tier, when all 3 of those lower tiers are being affected. Their self-esteem decreases, which in turn decreases their strength and perceived freedom and their status, and they care very little for the recognition or status, and they find little pleasure in life at all. And finally, because now all of those 4 bottom tiers are threatened, they no longer have the desire to become the most that they can be, and it's a painful cycle. So one could suffer depression because of having a communicable disease, because of mood swings caused by the contagious disease, but not necessarily because depression is a communicable disease. So it can mimic communicable diseases. Moods can spread, emotions can spread, depressive symptoms can be contagious. If you've ever heard it said your mood is contagious, while research is being done to determine if depression can also be categorized as a communicable disease or infection that can be spread like the flu, at this time, there's no evidence that states depression is literally contagious. So we move on to non-communicable diseases. So non-communicable diseases are the leading cause of disease and mortality in the world, as stated by the World Health Organization. Depression is considered a non-communicable disease, and therefore it coexists with other chronic non-communicable diseases. It's treated separately instead of together. And then because it's treated separately, it is also treated by different specialists. And often when there are different specialists treating the same person, there can be a lack of communication between the specialties. However, the mental health program of the World Health Organization is working together with members of states and other partners to help develop and implement policies and plans that reflect the vision of the World Health Organization, which states that no health without mental health. So I think it's simple and direct. Some of the things that are specific concerns for self-care or self-harm. People with depression often find ways of self-medicating through, and they end up becoming addicted to substances. And then later on down the line, if they've get addicted to drugs and alcohol, and combining those substances can be deadly. And then it can also, if untreated, can lead to suicide later on, which is down at the bottom of the page there. And then self-injury, another coping mechanism, is inflicting self-pain or injury, where they feel the relief comes from this. And cutting or burning are the most common forms of self-injury. And while it's not always a deliberate intent to harm themselves, sometimes serious life-threatening injuries can occur, and then also accidental deaths. And then reckless behavior. When people are feeling hopeless, worthless, angry, or bad about themselves, sometimes they resort to reckless behaviors, such as putting themselves in risky situations without thinking about the potentially dangerous consequences. And then relationship problems. Think about how when you're stressed, how your relationships suffer. You may lash out irrationally, stop going to social events. You just want to be alone. And so this impairs those relationships over time. And then health concerns. These people, to feel well and whole, these people need to take care of themselves. And oftentimes they sleep a lot and they don't eat well, and they to maintain the energy levels that they need to exercise. They care less and less about their health, and then they start to get sick, and chronic diseases can also surface. And then suicide. Well, thoughts of suicide are not generally initial symptoms of depression if it's untreated. Sometimes these individuals feel that the only way out of the pain is to just end their life, and it's very sad. While people with depression are not at risk to harm other people per se intentionally, sometimes their behaviors can affect others adversely because they don't see the consequences of their reckless behavior. There can be unintended risk for harm to others. If a person who is depressed exhibits a reckless behavior, such as reckless driving, an innocent bystander may be injured. If a person becomes addicted to substances to self-treat depression, their mental impairment because of the substances may cause harm also to an unintended innocent bystander. And then as far as predisposition, I just wanted to make mention that a child who is abused in any way in their early life is prone to suffer from depression later in their life if they don't get help, both mentally and physically. So anyway, there are my references. Thanks for listening.